The San Francisco night was a tapestry of distant lights and deep shadows, but inside the Nexus Tech skyscraper, it felt like a sterile, sunless noon. The air on the 34th floor, the heart of operations, was cold and thin, humming with the sound of server fans and the frantic clicking of keyboards. Glass walls partitioned the space into a maze of anxiety, reflecting the blue-white glow of monitors onto the faces of engineers who had been running on caffeine and adrenaline for hours. A critical system for their biggest launch had just crashed, and panic was a tangible thing, a low-grade electrical current running through the room. This was a place built for success, a monument of steel and silence, but tonight it was a tomb of impending failure, where every ticking second felt like a shovel of dirt being thrown on a grave. He descended from the executive suite, not like a leader, but like a storm. Elias Vance, CEO and founder, moved through the open-plan office with a rigid posture that made his bespoke suit look like armor. His gaze was a weapon, sharp and dismissive. As he scanned the room for someone to blame, he stopped by the lead architect's desk, not even bothering to lower his voice. "For 6 months, you've assured me of stability. For a 7-figure salary, I expect more than vague apologies and blank stares." The words were precise, each one a perfectly aimed dart designed to wound. He wasn't looking for solutions. He was looking for a sacrifice. His presence sucked the remaining oxygen from the room, replacing the collaborative panic with a singular, focused fear directed squarely at him. The man who had built this empire and could just as easily tear it down. Away from the epicenter of the CEO's fury, Clara sat at a terminal near the windows, seemingly in her own world. She was the newest junior engineer, a transplant from Oakland, whose simple, neat cardigan stood in stark contrast to the corporate logos and expensive watches around her. She hadn't been looking at the panicked group chats or the frantic dashboards. Instead, her eyes were tracing the logic of the failed code, her brow furrowed in deep concentration, not fear. She saw the flaw, a tiny, elegant mistake that everyone else, in their rush, had missed. Taking a quiet breath, she stood up and walked directly toward Elias. Her voice was steady and clear, cutting through his tirade with unnerving calm. "Mr. Vance," she said, waiting for his intimidating gaze to fall upon her, "I think I found the problem. It's an asynchronous call that wasn't properly nested." Elias turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in her unfamiliar face and the sheer audacity of her interruption. He saw a kid, an outsider, who didn't belong in this high-stakes war room. "And who are you?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. But Clara didn't flinch. She simply pointed to a line of code on a nearby monitor, her explanation flowing with a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. The room went silent, the other engineers leaning in, their expressions shifting from fear to dawning realization. It's a powerful moment to be the one person with the answer when everyone in charge sees you as insignificant. So many people have to fight just to be heard in rooms where they're judged before they even speak. If you believe their stories matter, please consider subscribing, because your support helps us continue to share them. In the days that followed, Elias found himself watching Clara. It wasn't a managerial observation or a strategic assessment. It was something far more human, more curious. He noticed the small things that set her apart from the polished, transactional culture he had built. She ate lunch at her desk, not from a trendy delivery service, but from a simple container she brought from home. He saw her patiently explaining a complex API to a struggling intern, her voice devoid of the condescension that was so common on the floor. She moved through the steel and glass world of Nexus Tech with a quiet grace, an anchor of authenticity in a sea of ambition. He saw her not as a solution to a technical problem, but as a puzzle his own life had no pieces for. She was a reminder of a language he had long forgotten how to speak. He began to piece together the fragments of her life through these small observations. He saw her leave the building each evening and walk toward the Montgomery Street station, disappearing into the belly of the city's public transit system. He imagined her journey across the bay, back to a world vastly different from his own penthouse overlooking the glittering water, while he returned to a home of cavernous silence, filled with art he no longer saw and furniture that offered no comfort. She was returning to a life he could only guess at. He pictured a small, warm apartment, the sounds of a vibrant neighborhood, the presence of family or friends. The thought lodged itself in his mind. Her world, though materially poorer, was infinitely richer in the ways that now felt most important. Clara's commute was a daily decompression, a journey between two separate realities. The sleek, silent efficiency of San Francisco's financial district slowly gave way to the rhythmic clatter of the BART train as it sped under the bay. When she emerged in Oakland, the air felt different, thick with the smells of street food and the sounds of music drifting from open doorways. Her apartment was small, a third-floor walk-up with a view of a brick wall, but it was hers. It was filled with second-hand books, thriving plants, and photos of her family. This was her sanctuary, the place where she shed the armor she had to wear at Nexus Tech and remembered who she was. The daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher who had poured all their hopes into her future. Those hopes were a heavy, precious weight. She remembered her father's calloused hands carefully fixing her first computer, his quiet pride when she got the scholarship. She remembered her mother staying up late to help her with essays, her unwavering belief that Clara's mind could build a bridge out of their neighborhood and into a world of opportunity. Every condescending glance from a senior engineer, every dismissive comment about her state school education, was not just an insult to her, but to their sacrifice. Her determination was forged in this love and this pressure. She wasn't just coding for a paycheck. She was validating the faith of the two people who had given her everything, proving that their humble life had produced something of immense value. A week later, Elias broke his pattern of distant observation. He sent a calendar invite to Clara for the quarterly executive strategy meeting. It was an unprecedented move, and the ripple effects were immediate. When she walked into the boardroom, a space typically reserved for vice presidents and top-level architects, a hush fell over the room. The air crackled with unspoken questions and quiet judgments. She felt the weight of their collective gaze, the silent assessment of her simple dress, her lack of a designer handbag. It's an incredibly lonely feeling. To know your worth is being debated by people who haven't even bothered to learn your name. If you've ever felt invisible in a room where you deserve to be, your subscription gives a voice to those stories. Clara took a seat at the polished mahogany table, her posture straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. For the first hour, she just listened as the executives debated market penetration strategies with a flurry of buzzwords and abstract projections. When a lull fell, Elias turned to her. "Clara, any thoughts?" he asked, his voice neutral, all eyes swiveled back to her. She didn't offer a grand strategic vision. Instead, she spoke about the user experience of their entry-level product, pointing out 3 specific, frustrating flaws that a high-income user would never notice, but that created a significant barrier for a student or a low-wage worker. Her insight was simple, practical, and utterly undeniable. She wasn't just smart, she was perceptive in a way they had forgotten to be. One evening, they were the last 2 people left on the floor, chasing a stubborn bug before a patch release. The city lights outside the panoramic windows looked like scattered jewels. The usual office tension had dissolved with the departing employees, leaving a comfortable silence. Elias broke it, leaning back in his chair with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire empire. "We just closed a deal that will increase our valuation by 10%, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any triumph. "And all I can think about is the paperwork." He looked over at her, his guard down for the first time. "Does it ever feel like you're just running in place, only faster?" Clara stopped typing and turned her chair to face him. She didn't offer a platitude or a compliment. Instead, she told him about her grandfather, who had owned a small neighborhood bakery. She described how he knew every customer by name, how he would give away the day's leftovers to families who were struggling, and how the entire community mourned when he passed away. "He never made much money," she said softly, her eyes genuine and clear. "But he was the richest man I ever knew. His legacy wasn't a number in a bank account, it was in the lives he touched." That simple story shifted something deep inside him, a tectonic plate of forgotten values. It's amazing how one person's truth can offer a lifeline to another. Sharing these moments of connection is why we do this, and subscribing is the best way to help us continue. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a brilliant engineer, but a woman with a deep well of wisdom that his Ivy League education and ruthless business acumen had never provided. She was the antidote to the poison of his own cynicism. The professional barrier that had existed between them seemed to dissolve in that moment, replaced by a profound and unnerving sense of human connection. The bug in the code suddenly felt insignificant. He cleared his throat, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "Clara," he began, his voice softer than he intended, "I'm not asking as your CEO. I'm asking as Elias. Would you be willing to have dinner with me sometime?" The first dinner led to a second, and soon their connection was an open secret, a topic of hushed conversations in the break rooms and whispered speculation in the elevators. The narrative was swift and cruel. The naive girl from Oakland had expertly used her one moment of glory to seduce the powerful, lonely CEO. Clara felt the shift in the atmosphere around her. Colleagues who were once friendly now offered tight, forced smiles. Her ideas in meetings were met with a new kind of scrutiny, as if they were tainted by her association with Elias. She carried herself with unwavering dignity, focusing on her work. But at night, the injustice of it all would settle in her chest, a cold, heavy stone. Elias saw the rumors and the toll they were taking on her, and it ignited a fierce, protective instinct, but it also triggered the old ghosts of his past. His divorce had been a brutal affair, a battleground of accusations where love had been weaponized for financial gain. His ex-wife's parting words about how he was only valuable for his money echoed in the darkest corners of his mind. One evening, he gave Clara a simple, elegant bracelet as a gift. Her eyes lit up with pure, unadulterated joy, but for a split second, a venomous thought pierced his mind. Is she just a better actress? The battle to trust her was a war waged entirely within himself, against the well-armed spectre of his own history. He knew the ultimate test would be introducing her to Leo. He arranged a casual lunch at his minimalist, sterile house, hoping the neutral territory would ease the tension. But from the moment Leo walked in, the air became frigid. His teenage son, already embittered by the divorce, looked at Clara not as a person, but as a symbol of his mother's replacement. He answered her warm questions with monosyllabic grunts, his eyes fixed on his phone. The final blow came when Clara complimented the home. Leo looked up, a cruel smirk on his face. "Yeah, my dad has great taste," he said, his words dripping with insinuation. "He always invests in things he thinks will have a high return." The accusation hung in the air, a direct hit on both Clara and Elias, tangling their budding hope in the thorny weeds of the past. The fight was a detonation of long-suppressed grief and teenage fury. It wasn't about the bracelet or the dinners anymore. It was about the raw, gaping wound of a broken family. Leo, his face pale with rage, finally hurled the words that had been poisoning him for months. "She's just another one of your acquisitions, isn't she? A startup you can pour money into until you get bored." The accusation struck Elias harder than any market crash ever could, because it echoed the deepest fear in his own heart. The slam of the front door was a gunshot in the cavernous silence of the house. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Elias. He mobilized his entire security team, called every contact he had, turning the search for his son into a corporate-level operation. But the city was vast, and Leo had simply vanished, swallowed by a world his father's money and power couldn't penetrate. Clara watched Elias unravel, his composure shattering into 1,000 frantic phone calls. She saw a man stripped of his CEO armor, reduced to the primal terror of a father who had lost his child. While his team traced credit cards and scanned surveillance feeds, she closed her eyes and thought. She remembered a passing comment Leo had made weeks ago, a complaint about the sterile quiet of his father's world, and a nostalgic mention of an old arcade his mum used to take him to in the Mission District. It was a place of noise, chaos, and simple joy, the absolute antithesis of Elias's life. It was a long shot, a flicker of intuition against a mountain of data, but she knew it was the right one. Without a word, she grabbed her keys and slipped out of the house, leaving the high-tech manhunt behind for the simple hope of human understanding. The arcade was a cacophony of synthesized explosions and 8-bit anthems, a sensory assault under the pulsing neon lights. She found him in a shadowy corner, hunched over a classic fighting game, his shoulders tense. He didn't look up as she approached, his focus locked on the frantic movements of the digital characters on screen. She didn't speak. She simply slid a token into the adjacent machine and started a new game. Her presence a quiet offering rather than an intrusion. After a few minutes of shared, silent gaming, she finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper above the noise. "I'm not trying to replace your mom," she said, her eyes on her own screen. "I just want to see your dad smile again, and you too." The words were simple, honest, and completely disarming. Elias burst through the arcade doors minutes later, his face a mask of desperation. He expected to find a confrontation, a tearful argument, or worse, an empty space where his son had been. Instead, he saw them, Clara and Leo, sitting side by side, bathed in the flickering glow of the game console. They weren't talking, but the space between them was filled with a fragile peace, a silent truce. In that one stunning tableau, every last vestige of his cynical doubt dissolved. He saw with absolute clarity that Clara's love wasn't a strategy or a transaction. It was a gift. It was a gentle, powerful force capable of reaching into the darkest corners of his broken family and offering a light. He was witnessing not a threat to his old life, but the architect of a new one. He walked toward them, the sounds of the arcade fading into a dull roar in his ears. He stopped before his son, and for the first time, Leo looked up at him without anger, his eyes filled with a weary confusion. "Leo," Elias began, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I'm sorry for everything." He then turned his gaze to Clara, whose own eyes were shining with unshed tears. The question came from a place deeper than thought, a pure, instinctual need to make this moment, this fragile connection, permanent. In the middle of the noisy, chaotic arcade, surrounded by the ghosts of a forgotten childhood, he asked her to marry him. It wasn't a proposal of wealth or status, but a plea to build a new legacy together, one pixel, one shared smile at a time. The wedding was not a grand affair splashed across society pages, but a quiet gathering in a garden overlooking the bay, the city a distant, muted backdrop. There were no press, no business partners, only a small circle of people who had witnessed their journey. Leo stood beside his father, not as a resentful teenager, but as a young man with a newfound calm in his eyes, holding the simple rings that symbolized a promise far deeper than any corporate contract. When Elias looked at Clara, her smile genuine and radiant, he didn't see an asset or a solution. He saw his anchor, the woman who had navigated the wreckage of his past and led him back to solid ground. The vows they exchanged were not just words. They were the final lines of code, rewriting their entire operating system, replacing a legacy of isolation with a future built on connection. In the months that followed, the change in Elias was palpable. The rigid posture softened, and the intimidating gaze was often replaced by a look of quiet contentment. He started leaving the office at 5, trading late-night conference calls for evenings spent helping Leo with his college applications or simply talking with Clara on their small apartment balcony in Oakland, which they chose over his cavernous penthouse. At Nexus Tech, Clara's ascent was steady and earned. She was promoted to lead a new division focused on user accessibility, her insights from the boardroom now shaping company policy. Her voice, once an interruption, was now sought after, a respected and integral part of the company's future. She never had to raise it. Her competence spoke volumes, proving her worth in every project she delivered, silencing the whispers with the undeniable sound of her success. Together, they channeled their shared vision into something tangible, something that would extend beyond the walls of Nexus Tech. They established the Oakland Bridge Foundation, an initiative funded by the company but driven by Clara's personal mission. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship programs, and tech boot camps for talented students from underserved communities, creating the very opportunities that Clara had fought so hard to find for herself. It wasn't charity, it was an investment in human potential, a belief that brilliance wasn't confined to certain zip codes. Elias found a new kind of fulfillment in this work, realizing that building a bridge for a young engineer from a place like Oakland to a place like Nexus Tech was a far more enduring achievement than launching another billion-dollar product. He was no longer just building an empire, he was building a legacy of impact. Their new life was built not on grand gestures, but on a collection of small, quiet moments, a shared laugh over a burnt dinner, the comfortable silence of reading side by side, the pride in watching Leo confidently walk onto his college campus. Elias finally understood what Clara's grandfather, the baker, had known all along. True wealth wasn't measured in market valuation or stock options, but in the richness of human connection, in the courage to be vulnerable, and in the love that heals and builds anew. He had traded his glass-walled kingdom for a home, and in doing so, had found a purpose that was infinitely more valuable. Seeing a family like this find its way back to hope is a powerful reminder of what truly matters. And your support is what allows us to keep telling these stories. Thank you for being a part of this journey.